The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. Major British recruiters linked to tax avoidance schemes as workers are hit with crippling HMRC demands. Global markets are steady this morning following a dramatic sell-off on Wall Street as fears grow over how President Trump's tariffs will hit the US economy. Plus, as new details emerge about how an oil tanker and cargo ship collided in the North Sea, we'll hear from a firm that helps mitigate maritime risk. A very good morning and welcome to Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, our Sky News investigation has revealed how some of Britain's biggest recruitment companies were linked to large-scale tax avoidance schemes, placing workers into jobs, including government roles, over the course of 2 decades. Many of these workers were paid by third-party umbrella companies with their salaries given as loans. That was to allow them to circumvent income tax. It is the latest revelation in a scandal that has caused untold misery for tens of thousands of people who'd signed up with umbrella companies thinking that they were above board. Well, our business and economics correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, has been looking into this story and has this report.
Well, they keep sending letters when I was in hospital. Eventually, I have to send in the doctor's report, and they stop sending me letters.
A brief respite, but living with debt is a constant ordeal. HMRC is demanding that Manuel pay back tax, which should have been deducted from his pay.
I've been told I'm guilty, and I got to pay. But the people who did the scheme can come back and do it again.
In 2006, Manuel was recruited as a piping supervisor by Atlantic Resourcing, the recruitment arm of energy giant Petrofac. His recruiter connected him to a third party known as an umbrella company, which managed his pay and claimed it was paying all relevant tax. It was operating a tax avoidance scheme. HMRC caught on and hit him with a £4,000 bill.
By the time I couldn't pay it, I was short of money because I had a cancer and I couldn't work. I thought, why should they not pay any money?
Petrofac was not legally responsible for collecting the tax, and the company said it is not involved in or responsible for the administration of taxes for self-employed limited company contractors. We are therefore not able to comment on the tax affairs of such contractors. Manuel is not alone. Around 50,000 people across Britain, including cleaners, nurses and council workers, are facing tax demands after falling into tax avoidance schemes. These schemes were not illegal, but used tax loopholes, paying workers loans instead of salaries to avoid income tax. Many saw deductions on their pay slips, which they wrongly assumed were taxes. Instead, the schemes were pocketing them in fees.
In the Red Book, we set out in detail the action we will take to shut down disguised remuneration schemes.
The loan charge was introduced in 2019 to recoup the missing tax. It transferred the legal responsibility for collecting the tax onto the workers. They say they were let down by the agencies they trusted. And Sky News has seen evidence of major recruitment agencies, such as Hayes, recommending umbrella companies that turned out to be tax avoidance schemes. A spokesperson for Hayes said, Hayes engages only with umbrella companies that appropriately meet legal and financial obligations. We conduct thorough due diligence when adding an umbrella company to our PSL list. The government has now launched a review, but crucially, it's not looking at the role of recruitment agencies, accountants, or the promoters of the tax avoidance schemes.
Schemes like these were littered throughout the recruitment supply chain. Agencies pushed them, accountants greenlit them, lawyers approved them. But they were ticking time bombs waiting to go off. And now it's the workers who are paying the price.
And many, including Peter, not his real name, are wondering why the wider industry has escaped accountability.
They are the key agency for central government work. If Capita says something to you, then you believe it's correct.
Peter worked for what was then the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills. He says his recruiter Capita gave him a list of umbrella companies to use. But he was later hit with the loan charge. He was so overwhelmed that in 2019 he attempted to take his own life.
I sent HMRC a suicide note because I thought I was just fed up with all of this. I was just fed up with the way they've been behaving. I've been on antidepressants. I live in denial. I try to deny that things happen. I do drink alcohol sometimes, quite a bit.
Capita said, "We have strict policies in place to ensure both Capita and our suppliers comply with relevant law, policies and procedures." Ministers are now strengthening the law to make recruitment agencies responsible for tax collection. But that provides little comfort to those who have already fallen foul. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Well, Gurpreet is with me now here in the studio. I mean, there'll be some people who go, you know what, they should have probably realised at the time that what they were doing was maybe avoiding tax. But there'll be others who are saying, what's the government doing here that if it was legal at the time, they shouldn't be punished now?
Yeah, well, the government has been alert to the scale of this for some time. Successive governments have been alert to this for some time. And in particular, they're really sensitive to the money that's at stake here. These aren't just, if it was a few £1 million, they could have just written it off. But they can't do that without it being a fiscally relevant event, which, when you consider how constrained the public finances are, it's not a politically easy option. But what this government now is doing is it's trying to strengthen the law going forward. So in that package, it talks about recruitment agencies. They're now changing the law so that recruitment agencies will be held legally responsible for tax collection. It's not enough to say the umbrellas in our supply chain, we're dealing with it. They will be now held legally responsible. But that provides very little respite for those like Manuel, who you heard from in the package, who've already been caught out by all of this. And I think what this report shows is how far these schemes proliferated throughout the recruitment supply chain. And while many of the recruitment agencies didn't know the umbrellas they were recommending were tax avoidance schemes, they also said they did their due diligence, which was enough for many people. When you've got companies like the ones I've just referenced, the strength of their recommendations is enough to give people confidence. I think the problem here is, and it touches to the point that you made, is that tax avoidance is a legally grey area. It's not tax evasion. Those in the know will probably be aware that HMRC was always likely to shut these schemes down and then to go after people for the missing tax. And in this case, they have done that. They've gone after the individuals. But they would say, well, clearly there's a whole ecosystem of players here, whether that's the recruitment agencies, whether that's the accountants, whether that's the umbrella companies, and that the government should be looking at them too. But the government's been very clear that in its review, it will not be doing that. OK. Gurpreet, thank you very much indeed for that. And you can get more on that story on, indeed, the Sky News website. Thank you. Now, global markets are broadly steady this morning after fears of a US recession sent stocks tumbling on Wall Street yesterday. The slowdown has reached Asia markets. They did slide this morning following, of course, those anxiety over tariffs and the potential recession in the world's largest economy. Europe has opened a little lower, a bit of a mixed picture, though, as you can see in different parts of Europe. The FTSE largely unchanged after a losing streak yesterday. It's down, but just a fraction down, 0.29%. On the currency markets, sterling up nearly 0.5% against the dollar at 1.29, doing pretty well at the moment. And it is also up, as you can see, the euro against the dollar. And when it comes to oil, Brent crude up just over 1% at $70 a barrel. Well, our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson, has been monitoring the situation, of course, from China, where many of those tariffs have been imposed by the United States.
After big losses in the United States, especially on the NASDAQ, shares and markets here in Asia have taken a pretty significant hit. Japan, South Korea and Australia were all down. Now, they've since managed to rally, but have taken losses of around 1%. There's so much volatility and uncertainty on the market. Across Asia, countries are waiting to see what type of reciprocal tariffs President Trump will introduce. Here in China, they've had tariffs imposed of 20%. And Japan and Australia are now scrambling with the US administration to try and get an exemption from the steel and aluminium tariffs of 25% that are due to take effect tomorrow. At the same time, we've had some movement in the artificial intelligence space. Here in China, a new AI large language model called Menace AI has been launched, and it's getting a great deal of attention. It's said that it can make its own decisions, that it has independent thought and action, that it could not only help us with our jobs, but it could replace our jobs. So that received a great deal of focus in the US, but there are mixed reports about how successful it is. Some commentators are calling it a breakthrough, while others are saying it is overhyped. But it does go to indicate just how much focus there is in this global race, particularly between the United States and China, on technology and especially artificial intelligence.
I think that was Nicole Johnson in Beijing. Well, let's have a look at some of the biggest fallers on Wall Street yesterday. They included Tesla, which led the tech sell-off, shedding more than 15% of its value yesterday, but it's down 50% since December. Quite a big fall there for the Elon Musk controlled company. Meanwhile, the microchip technology company Nvidia wasn't far behind, losing just over 10%. I think so. That was the microchip technology company, I should say, not necessarily Nvidia. While Palantir, a darling of the US tech scene, also plunged some 10%. Let's speak to Lindsay James, investment strategy at Quilter Investments. Lindsay, very good morning to you. A very difficult day, particularly for those tech firms yesterday, and it really was. I think it was the worst day for about 6 months, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, that's right. It's actually the biggest fall, I think, single day fall since 2022. And really, investors had to digest comments from Donald Trump over the weekend where he really refused to rule out a recession in the US. This is a huge turnaround, of course, where at the beginning of the year, it was seen as really sort of the darling stock market of the world that could do no wrong. But since then, the on again, off again tariffs, the 1 month reprieve that we've had, and his insistence that the US has to go through this period of transition has really, I think, caught investors by surprise. He doesn't seem to care so much about the return to the stock market anymore. It's not the barometer of his approval ratings, if you like, that it used to be. So that floor that had been under US equities seems to have been pulled out.
Yeah, it is kind of extraordinary, isn't that, Lindsay, that a man in and out of office was using the stock market as a proper barometer, no longer doing so. But there are others that will suggest that actually, you know what, the stock exchange in the US has done pretty well over the last couple of years, that it was a bit bubbly, and actually this is just kind of sorting things out, if you like.
Well, absolutely, yes. Over the last couple of years, we've had 2 years where returns have been in excess of 20% in the US stock market, and that is very unusual. And during that process, we saw valuations get to pretty stretched levels, particularly in the case of the Magnificent Seven stocks, where their valuations were really linked to the hype around AI. And so some of that is just this reappraisal of the outlook. And some of it, of course, is as well that fund management companies have generally been positioned overweight the US and underweight China and Europe. And perhaps that had really reached extremes. So a little bit of better news for China and Europe, weaker news for the US has seen potentially the beginnings of some sizable asset flows between those markets.
Now, I talked about Tesla, didn't I, just then? And we've heard from Elon Musk. He's been speaking to Fox News in the United States. And I think it's fair to say that he's feeling the strain a little, maybe. Let's have a watch.
You giving up your other stuff? I mean, how are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. Yeah.
With great difficulty, i.e., he's got a lot on his plate. Tesla down 50% effectively since December. I mean, how's this going to work? I mean, can he manage to do this? And how do you think the other shareholders in Tesla feel about this? I mean, they must feel somewhat abandoned.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, perhaps reappraising his enormous pay packet and his demands last year for a packet of around $56 billion, I think. So, yeah, I think the outlook for Tesla is certainly challenged whilst we're still seeing those new orders really falling by around 50% in parts of the world, Europe in particular, where I think in Germany, for example, Elon Musk's involvement in the election has really soured opinion on that car brand. And I think that is almost irrecoverable for him. So very difficult outlook for Tesla. I think that share price is going to be under pressure until we start to see those sales figures improving. But perhaps not everyone will be too sad to see Elon Musk a little bit poorer today than he was a few days ago.
OK, Lindsay, appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed with her analysis this morning. Lindsay James there. Thank you. Now, the market sell-off is partly being driven, as we've just been talking about, uncertainty over trade. The US will impose a 25% tariff on steel imports from tomorrow. Ed Conway has been looking at that.
I imagine by now you're a little bit fatigued with this topic, tariffs, but I'm afraid there's much more of it to come. Everyone is finding this a bit much. If you look at just the measure of uncertainty, this is just a particular measure. It's showing just how much people are talking about a particular issue. In this case, trade. And the higher this line is, the more uncertainty there is. So it's a big issue in newspapers. Have a look at this. This last time around, it went up to a really high peak under Donald Trump in his first term in office. Where are we now? Look at this line. So a lot of uncertainty out there, and that's having a bearing on share prices. This is showing you a measure of just share prices and how they've gone since the inauguration. So there's the US, there's China, there's other countries. Have a look at this, though. The US down by 6.4%. Some people are calling this the Trump slump, and he's very sensitive when it comes to share prices. Well, they are down quite a lot because people are worried about the impact of all these tariffs on the US economy, whereas other places, the UK, Germany, are actually up. Germany up by 12%, which is really striking, isn't it? And the UK up in positive territory as well, China too as well. So the US a real outlier when it comes to share prices, and it's all because people are looking at what are the next tariffs actually going to be. And the answer to that is right now it's aluminium and steel, OK? So these are the next tariffs that are due to be coming in. Worth asking the question last time around, because there were these tariffs or similar tariffs imposed back in 2018. Last time, did they have an impact? Well, this is showing you US aluminium production, primary aluminium production. It did go up after those tariffs were imposed last time around. But then, look, it came down. It then fell. And actually, it's lower now than it was even before then. So the point is, at least Donald Trump would like this line to go up again. But will that happen? Well, let's have a look at this. This is showing you where the US imports steel and aluminium from. Steel, first of all, because this is one of the things, the first thing, the big thing that's going to be have tariffs imposed or reimposed on it. Most of that comes from Canada. So it's Canada, then Mexico and a few other countries as well. And with aluminium, it's even more Canada. So there's been so much talk recently about Canada-specific tariffs, but these metal tariffs would really affect Canada, but the UK as well. So the UK is not a massive steel producer, but some of the stuff we do produce, quite high-value stuff, goes to the US. This is showing you our exports to the US in recent years. And right at the top there, stainless steel. So this is kind of high-value stuff. That will be affected. Worth saying, waste and scrap. So that's not included in the tariffs, and that's something that is excluded. But most of these other things included, and that could be a real impact for the UK steel sector. And then in retaliation for some of these tariffs, not just the metal tariffs, but those overall tariffs on China, there's another metal story here, which is that China is saying, we're going to put limits on the amount of stuff that we're sending out, including molybdenum, really important as an ingredient for alloys. And China, look over here, China, by far and away the world's biggest producer of molybdenum, so too tungsten. Again, you put tungsten into steel to make it stronger. China says, we're going to limit the amount of tungsten that we're sending out there, and just look at how dominant China is when it comes to tungsten production. So put all of this together, and you can see why some people are so concerned that the tariffs are fueling a wider trade war.
Ed Conway there on those tariffs that are due to be imposed from tomorrow. You're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up, though, in a couple of minutes, as more details emerge about that collision yesterday in the North Sea, we'll be hearing from a firm that helps mitigate maritime risk. Stay tuned for that.
Here we go.
2, 1.
You, Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated, but left
in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have taken years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
1,500 movies? I don't want this flight to end. Flying units fly better. Thank you.
Now, an investigation is underway into how an oil tanker crashed into a cargo ship in the North Sea, with fears that the collision could result in an environmental disaster as jet fuel and sodium cyanide spill into the water. But with shipping lanes becoming increasingly busy, how can these kind of incidents be avoided? Let's speak to Tony Hildrew. He's founder and chief executive of Ceto AI. That's a firm which uses artificial intelligence to help ships mitigate risk. I suppose, Tony, what I want to ask you first, I'm sure you've seen the images this morning. I think the cargo ship has clearly disappeared below the water. But the tanker, it looks like it's kind of almost been torpedoed, if you like, by a missile. What have you taken away from the images that we've seen, the aerial shots today?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty shocking, in all honesty, when you look at the damage that's occurred. It's not a common thing to see, really, when you've got a vessel proceeding at 16 knots and it T-bones another ship. So yeah, quite shocking. Sadly, I know there's a crew member was still missing. Realistically, we don't want these things to be happening in the maritime industry. So yeah, the more we can prevent that from happening, the better.
Yeah, and what you look into this kind of thing. What do you think may be at play here? I mean, I know they've kind of ruled out any kind of malicious act, but as you say, these things shouldn't happen. What might have gone wrong? We know I think in Baltimore, for example, when that cargo ship crashed into a bridge, it was because of engine failure. Is that possible here, do you reckon?
I mean, engine failure, I think you can rule that out, given that the vessel was still very much underway. There's a chance there could have been some steering gear failure. But I think the most likely cause in this instance has probably been human error, in all honesty. There was no attempt to slow the vessel down. There was no attempt to change course. And ultimately, it comes down to the watchkeeping practices by the navigating officers on board the bridge.
And just on that point then, Tony, though, I mean, given the fact that you work in technology, one would have thought that there would be systems in place, technological systems, even if there is human error, to prevent this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have radars on board. You have 2 radars. I know that there was reports of low visibility during the incident, but the radars would have realistically helped to inform what was ahead. It comes back to proper passage planning as well. There should have been concessions made for transiting through an anchorage, and realistically, you have to go back to the first principles. Look out the window. Yes, you've got technology which has been introduced into maritime, which helps with collision avoidance, helps with identifying mechanical breakdowns, but ultimately, the human responsibility is still there.
OK, as you say, a catastrophic collision. There will be undoubtedly environmental damage, and clearly one crew member is missing. Tony, really appreciate your insight today. That's Tony Hildrew there from Ceto AI. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, that is it from me on Business Live for today. We're back at 4:30, of course, this afternoon. Coming up next, it is Jane Secker with the very latest news headlines, including more on the sentencing of Carl Clifford this afternoon. He's been sentenced, of course, for those horrific triple murders and rape. And we've just heard from Amy Hunt, the eldest daughter, who is giving her victim impact statement, saying that whatever sentence is handed down today, there is no real justice to be had here. I will never comprehend why you would do such a monstrous thing to us when we never showed you anything but kindness. You must be told of the horrific pain and trauma you've caused. Perhaps your family can pass on these words for us. I can think of nothing more cowardly. That is the victim impact statement of Amy Hunt there, the eldest daughter. As I said, we wait the sentencing of Carl Clifford. That is up next with Jane Secker. I will see you later on this afternoon.